All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. So excited to have you here today for our live preview of the mBSP program with Dr. Ryan Nemec and Dr. Roger Brotherton. Today we did our opener already. We're going to have some brief introductions. We're going to share a little bit about mBSP, and Ryan and Roger are going to share their favorite mBSP practices, and then we're going to jump into your Q&A. We received hundreds of questions, so we tried to pick a few that would touch on all the different topics that you reached out about. So we're really excited to get to those. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Ryan to introduce.
Wonderful. Excellent. Thanks, Sarah. Well, welcome everybody. So great to see all the smiling faces and the faces that are tapped into with curiosity and you're tapping into your love of learning, I know, here today. So Roger and I hope that we will satisfy those character strengths for you as we go forward. And thank you ahead of time for your questions that were ahead of time. And of course, feel free to put questions in the chat. Roger and I decided we wouldn't answer every question because then we'd be answering every question at the pace of every 5 seconds, and that would be quite difficult. We needed artificial intelligence to do that. So, but we will answer the major kind of questions and ones that were the common patterns that we saw. But first, I'm really honored and pleased to introduce Roger Brotherton. And so he is. There's many things that I can say about Roger. Let me just start with the kind of the logistics, the more traditional way, and then go into some other things. So Roger is he works as a consultant in a lot of different fields, consulting, and he also is faculty at the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland, RCSI, which is a leading institution for positive health and different related areas. He lives in England, and he and I had the chance. We've known each other for, gosh, what, 12 years or so, and collaborated on so many different projects. But we got a chance to meet face to face in England, and we didn't go bar hopping, but we went coffee shop hopping. And so in the United States, people often talk about bar hopping, which wasn't of interest to us, but we were interested in the coffee shop hopping as we connected on family and work and our own dreams and ideas, talking about our suffering, talking about struggles, and talking about character strengths and mBSP. We all kind of need friendships like that where we can connect like that. So that was wonderful to me to spend time in England. Now, Roger is a rare gem in the field of positive psychology in the sense that he's a scientist, practitioner, educator. We can't say that about most people in the field, and a lot of people might dabble with all those, but he actually embodies science, practice, and education, especially with character strengths and with mBSP, as we're focused on here today. Now, Roger is also quite special in the sense that he does another thing that is unique, which is he practices what he preaches. If we're going to teach mindfulness or teach character strengths, teach yoga, whatever it is we're teaching, we need to be able to have a strong practice ourselves. And I can tell you, Roger has a very strong and diverse practice of how he applies character strengths and mindfulness into his daily life. And that's really at the crux of any mindfulness program, certainly at the crux of mBSP, because then we can bring forth that much more wisdom to other people. And we're coming from a place of authenticity when we're teaching. So that describes Roger. Now, I also wanted to say, well, Roger's also on the VIA Institute faculty. So those people that are working with character strengths and have a long track record of working with character strengths, as Roger does. Now, a final kind of thing I wanted to talk about with Roger is, literally you could point to any of the 24 character strengths, and if we had time, we would do this as a fun activity. Name any character strength, and then I will then describe Roger from that strength because he is strong on the 24. That might not be the goal of everybody, because that's a lot for the mind to take on, but whether it's his social intelligence as he's kind of understanding the perspective of other people and empathizing with other people, whether it's his humility, always comes from a place of humility and groundedness, whether it's his humor, making jokes and laughing and loving to laugh, whether it's his spirituality of being grounded, but also looking beyond himself, whether it's his leadership that you'll clearly see, his gratitude, we could go all the way through, and I could say how he's strong in that particular strength. Um, I think I'll pause there, and thank you for being here, Roger. This is very exciting to be here with you.
Thank you so much, Ryan. As a typical sort of Englishman, I'm sort of adverse to receiving compliments, so I'm actually going to receive that in my heart. Thank you so much. I was delivering a presentation a few weeks ago with some of my colleagues in Dublin, and at the end of it, I received a lovely round of applause. And Stephen Joseph, who some of you might know, is quite a big name in the world of positive psychology, and he was our keynote speaker. And he came up to me afterwards and he says, Roger, can I just give you a tip? Always take your applause. And he was noticing how I walked away and hid the moment it happened. So thank you so much, Ryan. Perhaps we should all learn to do that. Take your applause, savor the good things that people say about you. So I have the great privilege of introducing Ryan. I have to say that introducing other people is one of my favorite things to do, actually, because I love just the opportunity to say what other people mean to me. And Ryan said we've been friends for over a decade now. I think my favorite story about Ryan, of all the sort of the wise, clever, winsome, charming, funny things that I know about him is a few years back we were at a conference together in Budapest in 2018. And one of the things you have to know about Budapest is that all the taxis in Budapest are yellow, but you don't know what you're getting into when you get into a taxi. So when I first arrived at the airport, a big guy said, "Would you like a taxi?" I said yes. And then when they drove us not to our hotel, because they wouldn't go to our hotel for some reason, they then handed us a bill for 4 times more than I would have expected to pay for the journey. And it turned out we'd been taken by a scam by the Hungarian mafia, which is always a good way to start um, to a place. So you have to just keep that in mind. This is Budapest, taxis everywhere, they're all yellow. And Ryan is delivering, as he always does at conferences, many really fascinating workshops. Lots of people keen to hear from him. And Ryan's running a bit late to get to the conference venue, is crossing one of the bridges over the Danube, and thinks, I just better jump in a taxi. So he spots a yellow car, jumps in, says to the driver, take me to the conference venue. And the driver thinks for a moment and goes, okay, yeah, I can take you there. And then as they're driving, Ryan starts to look around the car and notices there's a few too many personal belongings in this car for it to be a taxi. And there's a child seat in the back. And then he turns to the driver and says, this isn't a taxi, is it? And the guy says, no. And they start talking, and it turns out this guy knows the conference venue well. His wife works there. Ryan offers to pay for the trip, but the guy says, "Don't worry, I'll take you there for free." And so they end up having this sort of lovely conversation out of this moment of embarrassment. And then I'm sat at the conference venue waiting for Ryan, and Ryan turns up. He runs into the venue. Um, Without breaking his stride, tells that story, and then just gets on with the workshop. And one of the reasons I really, really love that story about Ryan, even though in some ways you could say it's a story about a mistake, it to me says a few things about the way Ryan is. And one of the things I found about Ryan is there's just something immensely trustworthy about him. I've had the privilege of meeting many of my academic heroes over the years, and every now and then you get the feeling that they don't quite live up to what they've spoken about. But with Ryan, I get this deep sense of authenticity. He definitely lives up to the things that he talks about, which is really, really good. There's just solidity in him. He also has, and this is why he can walk into a workshop and just pick it up. He has the most incredible encyclopedic knowledge of the field of character strengths, which is why he's the director of the Center for Strength Science. Did I get those words in the right order there, Ryan? That's right. Yep. And he's changed roles just recently, but he's now really curating and promoting and participating in all the leading edge of character strength science around the world now. So alongside being a practitioner, having worked clinically and in health psychology, he's now really, really, pushing the edge of character strengths research as well. And then finally, just the other thing to say about Ryan is his generosity is incredible. So there are so many people now working in the field of character strengths like me who might not have settled in that area if it wasn't for Ryan being willing to collaborate, offering them time, willing to meet up. And that's why if you ever meet him in person at a conference, he's almost talking to somebody or having coffee with someone every single moment of every conference you're at because people want to talk to him, want to get his advice. And he's so generous in giving it away. So I'm really grateful to you, Ryan. Grateful for the generosity you've shown me, and grateful to count you as a friend too.
Thank you so much, Roger. It's very deep and very meaningful for me.
You guys, that was awesome. It was so great to hear a little bit more about you. And I know we know each other, but even I learned something new about each of you during that intro. So I appreciate that. It was lovely. Gonna go ahead and share my screen one more time. Okay. All right. Does this look okay for everyone?
You're sharing your presenter view at the moment. Just need to
Okay.
flip them.
Thank you. All right, so we just wanted to take a quick minute to share a little bit about the impact of mBSP with you all. So Ryan, wanted to hand it off to you to share a little bit more about the program.
Sure. Thanks, Sarah. So just so that everybody's on the same page, some of you are already certified in mBSP, some of you have studied it, some of you know something about it, but probably a lot of us are pretty new to it. So mBSP stands for Mindfulness-Based Strengths Practice, and it was created in 2013 when I was really wanting to bridge the best science and practice of mindfulness that was emerging and the best science and practice of character strengths. And with mindfulness, the lens that we take is very much about mindful living, very much about an awareness of what's going on within us in any moment. So there is meditation components to it, but the more important part is living our life in a mindful and authentic way and having that be a baseline and a default that we come back to, and how that merges with our very best qualities that we can be more tuned into and work through our strength blindness. So the best qualities being character strengths. So it's in this sense, it's a manualized 8-week program that brings all these together as sort of as some people call it, an mBSP toolbox. So it's a toolbox of many different practices that people practice and work with each week and between the weeks in order to make those mini and big transformations in their life, transformations in thinking and how they deal with feelings, how they deal with conflict and struggles and suffering, and how they can tap into their character strengths as well for generating better happiness and so on. I also want to point out that this is a rarity in the field of positive psychology as it has emerged. It wasn't necessarily a rarity in 2014 or 2013, but it has become a rarity in the sense that it's an empirically validated program. There's not many programs in positive psychology that you can point to say that. And so what that means is that it has a body of evidence that consistently supports various outcomes and in different contexts, as opposed to a lot of things that any good practitioner, whether you're an educator, psychologist, counselor, coach, any good practitioner is going to try to be grounded in some evidence. We call that evidence-based. Like, oh, I'm going to use this particular thing because I know some research that supports using signature strengths, or I know mindfulness has the grounding in evidence, so I'm going to teach mindfulness. So that's having an evidence base. But this is, again, at a kind of a higher level in that it's an empirically validated program. So that's what Roger and I and others around the world, we estimate about 50 countries, but what Roger and I and others do at the VIA Institute is to teach this program live for people. Yeah, so I'll maybe one other thing I'll say and then see if Roger wants to add to this is we won't go into all these nuances, but a lot of the program is about bringing mindfulness to character strengths and then bringing character strengths to mindfulness. So it's a two-way street, a two-way integration. So it's not just kind of like, oh, I'm kind of using mindfulness and I'm kind of aware of gratitude and I'm kind of doing that. But instead, it's a deep integration of literally how character strengths is the lens for your mindful living, your authentic mindful living, and your meditation practice, your mindful eating practice, your mindful walking practice, but also how mindfulness And this certain way of seeing and being in the world has something to do, or a lot to do, with your character strengths. So that's the two-way integration sheet, a two-way integration street, I should say. Um, Roger, any additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, sometimes when I'm describing the mBSP program to people, I would describe it as the mindfulness program for people who don't like mindfulness, really. That I often find that that combination of character strengths, what's good in you, what's strong, what comes naturally, what gives you energy, what feels essential to who you are, plus that sort of mindful awareness of the present moment in a sort of descriptive, observational, non-judgmental kind of way, that when you put those two things together, there's a sort of magic that occurs that you don't get when they're apart. And the reason I call it mindfulness for people who don't like mindfulness is that you'll notice that if you attend to your character strengths, you start to use your gratitude, or you start to use your love, or you notice where you're self-regulated, or you notice where you're bringing wisdom. Every character strength, to some extent, sort of holds within it already a sort of seed of mindfulness, a sort of moment of perception, a moment when we pause and we look at things differently. And I think it's the magic of those two things that come together that our colleagues call it the mutual support model of mindfulness and character strengths, that they sort of mutually support each other. And even empirically, in large populations of people, you see that the more mindful you are, the more likely you are to use your character strengths. The more you use your character strengths, the more mindful you're likely to be. And so it's a very sort of solid, really, really lovely way of putting those two things together.
Awesome.
Well
Thanks.
said, both of you. Thank you so much. Now, Ryan and Roger are going to share their favorite mBSP practices. So, starting with Ryan, I'll let you go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Sarah. So, yeah, so as I said, Roger and I could pick from 30 plus activities and practices within the toolbox of mBSP. The one that I want to pull out is mindful listening and mindful speaking, which of course is like two practices, so I'm cheating a little bit. Um, these are two practices that I think are somewhat, when we think of mindful living and using mindful or mindfully as an adverb or an adjective to anything that we're doing. Um, I think of these as some of the most difficult because I think it's something that we take for granted. And I'm speaking to people that are helping professionals like Roger and I. We're both clinical psychologists. It's easy to take for granted, like, yeah, I'm a mindful listener. I'm mindful with my speaking. I do active listening or whatever we call it. And I don't think it's ever good to be too confident when it comes to that kind of thing. There's always so much room to grow. And so in MBSP, we really emphasize that week after week of how to become a stronger mindful listener, which means to really be present to the other person. It means to be letting go of the clutter of our mind when we're thinking about this, but coming back to being here now with the person. Um, and what it means to be a mindful speaker, which means to speak directly, concisely, specifically from the heart. And those are far more challenging when we really bring mindfulness to them. We realize, gosh, I could do a lot more improvement. And then how would my relationship improve if I just slowed down to listen a little bit more? Because I know I take my spouse for granted, or my kids for granted, or my colleagues for granted. We have these autopilot patterns that we've established with them. But what if we break through them and we become more present with them? So we teach this in MBSP, and we weave in the character strengths uniquely. So with mindful listening and speaking, we think, how can I use my character strengths to listen better? How can I use my character strengths to speak more mindfully? And that becomes literally the question we pose. We don't want to tell people it must be this way or that way. I mean, we give examples, but each person then discovers, and we share this after we're doing a group discussion. We share, what character strength did you use to listen in that small group activity? What helped you? When you were speaking in front of that larger group with 30, 40, 50 people, what character strength helped you to be a mindful speaker? And as we say, any of the 24 strengths are possible. So we have heard all of them. So we hear people talking about, as a listener, they're using social intelligence to connect with the group. that they're speaking to. We hear love of learning as a speaker, really trying to kind of listen and observe the audience. We hear gratitude a lot for speaking. We hear people being brave. They were nervous to share. They tap into their bravery to share, honesty to share from the heart. So it's a fascinating area for our lives to grow, and mindfulness and strengths come together beautifully. We posed the question in mBSP sometime around session 2 or session 3. If you could improve on one of these two, mindful speaking or listening, what would it be in your life? And then everybody in the program shares, usually by chat, sometimes verbally, and it's usually a pretty even split. People that want to focus on listening versus speaking, but it is also again fascinating. The people's own self-discovery of what they need to work on and grow with throughout the program. So we'll have people that are very like chatty people that talk a lot, and that might not be so self-aware that they're talking so much. But when they slow down, they see themselves more deeply, and they often are the ones that say, you know what, I need to work on my mindful speaking to be more specific and not to be too wordy. And then we see parents pick mindful listening, that they want to be a better, more close listener to their children, using their strengths to do that. We always hear from people talking about their significant others and how they want to be a better listener to their significant other and be present to them that they've been taking for granted for a while. So it's a great practice to watch unfold over each week and up to the through the 8 weeks, and one that's lifelong. What about you, Roger? What would you pick?
Yeah, so Ryan, I also have cheated because as you say, we've got sort of 30 practices to choose from, and I thought, well, I'll choose two. And the two I've chosen actually come later in the program, so they probably come around about week 7 or session 7 in the program, which is about goodness and authenticity, how you become a better person and how you become a better you. And the reason I really like these two exercises, one's called defining moments and the other is called best possible self, is because they begin to introduce an element of time to our mindfulness. So you'll hear, as Ryan said, a lot of the program takes place really in the here and now. What are you doing with your character strengths in real time, right now in this room? But there's another way to think about it. Another way to think about it would be to say, what would we place this in your story? So a lot of us kind of live in some kind of script. We live in a script about our lives. For some of it, it's called a script called One Day I'll Make It. Other people, it's like I'll claw my way to the top. Other people have a script called Everything Goes Wrong Eventually. We all have these sort of different scripts that we live to. But when you do these two exercises, so defining moments and best possible self, you start to wonder, what does the story of your life look like if you start to define it according to these essential qualities that you've always had? They've always been there. If someone at the age of 5, had seen you, they would have seen elements of these things in you. What would it be like to define your life along those lines? So defining moments asks you to go back to a moment in your life that was really important, really counted. Perhaps you made an important decision, or you stood up for something that really mattered to you, and you revisit that moment mindfully, and you ask the question, what strengths were involved? What strengths did I use? And then best possible self flips to the other part of your life, to the future. And it really begins to ask the question, who are you becoming? We're all sort of striving, we're all sort of moving forward. And I use striving just in the best sense of the term. We all sort of have aspirations of hopes of what we might become. And if those hopes, if those goals were made, if they became real, who would you be? What would you be doing? This is a very common exercise in the field of positive psychology. There's over 30 studies on it in terms of the effectiveness of it for well-being. But one of the things that's really interesting when you add character strengths to that is that one of the dangers of the exercise is that sometimes creating an outcome can be a bit of a problem. We can actually get a bit distressed, or we can despair, or we can lose hope if we're not going to make that kind of outcome. Sometimes an outcome feels like it's something solid we're going to become, whereas actually what character strengths does is it invites you to start to think of this outcome as a process. In other words, if the wisdom that you already are, the gratitude you already are, the hope you can't help expressing, um, the love that you constantly express, the bravery that's part of who you are. If that found its full expression, what would happen then? Who would you become? What would happen? And so you see, in that session, we're sort of rewriting the entire narrative of our life, really, and beginning to say what's best in you, and how can you both see your past and live into your future in a way that uses those things. So just finally, one of the things I really, really love about this exercise is that it's another way of us moving away from the judgments that habitually pop us out of mindfulness. So quite often we fail to be mindful because we're too busy judging the world, labeling it up, labeling ourselves, labeling the people around us, thinking about what I need to be in order to be important, accepted, loved, successful, thinking about what other people need to be in order for us to be okay with ourselves. And every time we judge, we occupy a dualistic space. We go, it's either this or it's that. Whereas what these two things put together is they invite you into a story where it's not this or that. It's not two things, it's three things. It's a beginning, it's a middle, it's an end. Where have you come from? Where are you now? Where are you going to? And suddenly that has this deep, sort of compassionate way of looking at what's strong and what's good in you and how that can sort of reach its fruition in life. So that's why I love those two exercises. So it's defining moments, best possible self.
Wow. I'm like taking a moment to like let that settle in a little bit. Roger, that was super powerful. And I love the idea of like a start, a middle, and an end instead of just a this or that. So thank you so much. And I'll just say from my personal experience in mBSP, mindful listening really changed the game for me. Instead of listening to respond, I started listening to really hear people and what they were trying to say to me. So thank you both. That was awesome. I am just gonna take a moment before we jump into the Q&A, and I want to share a little bit about the mBSP program and also our mBSP certification. So the program that we were just talking about, the mBSP 8-week program, this is designed for anyone looking to deepen their mindfulness and character strengths practice. And with the activities that Ryan and Roger shared and so many more, you're sure to benefit in more ways than one. There are three mBSP cohorts remaining this year, and our next session starts on February 19th with Roger. And then he also is leading a session in May, and then you can catch Ryan in the fall in September. So QR code here, 20% off through the end of February for the mBSP program. And then we also wanted to just take a minute to highlight our mBSP certification. So this is for someone who's looking to take it a little bit further, ideal for coaches, therapists, educators or professionals who want to facilitate mBSP with their clients, their students, or organizations. And so, again, QR code will take you directly to the page so you can learn more, or you can reach out to info@viacharacter.org if you're looking for a little more information. And this is actually discounted through the end of February as well. First time we've ever discounted this certification. So if you're interested, reach out, check out the webpage to learn a little bit more. Um, or throw your questions in the chat and I'll record them and reach back out to you after the webinar. So, on to the good part, everyone. The Q&A. So like we said, we received tons of questions. So we are going to dive into a few of them. If you have any other questions, leave them in the chat. If we can get to them within the hour, we'll try to answer as many as we can. But if not, we'll follow up with you with an email after the session. So, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and read the question, and I'm going to pass it over to you. Roger, how can I use my strengths to maintain focus and discipline in daily activities? And how might mBSP be used to strengthen my willpower? I think we could all use that.
Sounds good, Sarah. Thank you very much. Yeah, so just to reiterate what Sarah said, we had over 100 questions. So what we've tried to do, or what Sarah has done, thankfully for us, is try and whittle them down into a few key themes. So I hope that somewhere in the midst of all this, we managed to answer some of the questions that have been put across. First thing to say on this is that when we introduce character strengths pretty early on in the mBSP program, one of the things we talk about, and it's a sort of an idea you can take away and use anytime, is we start to think about what are the everyday goals you're trying to achieve um, right now. And then we think about on what character strengths could you bring to their accomplishment. So this is really the sort of well-developed idea that character strengths are drivers of behavior. They're the sort of things we can lean on to energize us into various things. And what's really interesting about that exercise when you do it with a group is that the goals that people are aiming at are really, really diverse, like really, really different. So I've had some people in groups who've gone, I want to develop deeply spiritually, so they have these sort of deep, high, purposeful goals that are very transcendent. And then other people are saying, well, my life feels a bit of a mess and I can't do the dishes and my bedroom is a tip and I just really need to sort them out. So it goes right from the sort of extreme to these sort of high, lofty goals, right down to the everyday things that actually we sort of need to do to make life worth living. And I have to say that sometimes it's actually those smaller goals that are the real places where our character strengths are in operation. So I ask people at times to take any 20 minutes of their day and pause and ask the question, which character strengths have you just used? And what you'll find is even if for the last 20 minutes you've been doing something incredibly mundane, you will have been using your character strengths. So when it comes to sort of everyday activities and things like that, I think quite often we sort of feel like we need to have more oomph, be more enthusiastic about them, push ourselves more into them in some way. But actually, the reality is that many of those sort of practical things in everyday life are some of the best places to bring character strengths and mindfulness, like some of the absolute best places we can operate them. Let me just give you an example. So some people are doing the laundry. Some people are grateful for the clothes they have. Other people just like that as a moment to be quiet and use their body. Other people are saying, well, in fact, I was talking to someone the other day saying they've just developed a new laundry system for themselves where they categorize their clothes in certain ways, and therefore they've used their perspective, their wisdom to make it work for them. There's many, many different ways that we sort of bring our character strengths to very, very normal everyday activities. One of my character strengths actually is spirituality, so it's quite a strong one. I have this sort of deep desire in my heart that one day my house will be like a monastery. I'll come home and my children will be there in the lotus position meditating, and they'll say, Father, give me your wisdom. What actually really happens is they come home from school, throw their bag in the corner and say, Hey, Dad, guess who threw up at school today? That's more what happens. So this isn't really a monastery. It's sort of more like a zoo, to be honest, most of the time. But one of the questions I often ask myself when really mundane things need to be done, like changing light bulbs, taking out the trash, doing the laundry, washing the dishes, painting a fence, all these kind of things, maintaining the car. Um, because spirituality is strong for me, I will say, would someone do this in a monastery? And the answer to all those things usually is yes, they would. And that does two things for me. One, it gives me a sense of this is a place to be present, to be still, to be mindful and attentive to my body as it does those kind of things. The second thing it does for me that's sort of really helpful as well is that it removes sort of the gendered equation that can sometimes occur with household tasks. So there are some tasks that traditionally in certainly the culture I'm part of in the West, some would be viewed as male and others would be viewed as female. But in a monastery, none of that exists. So, it's all men. So a man's going to have to do it at some point. So you can see how you can bring different character strengths to things like that. Let me just talk to the final piece there as well. So how do you build willpower with character strengths? So it's been a sort of long sort of field of research for a really, really long time, and all the ways in which we build self-regulation. One of the findings from it would say that most people who have very high self-regulation weirdly don't use it that much. They're not going, oh, I must do, this difficult thing. Actually, what they do is they create habits, and the habits sort of look after things from there. But we can build self-regulation by finding ways in. So in character strengths, quite often we'll talk about pathway strengths. So there may be tasks you need to do that require some self-regulation, but self-regulation isn't strong for you. But maybe you can find in your way in through curiosity. Is it interesting? Could you explore it? Could you explain it? Find some interest in there somewhere. Maybe you can find your way in through social intelligence, thinking about who does this help? Who in my family, who among my friends is being helped by this? Maybe you can find your way in through zest. Sometimes it's just enjoyable, to throw ourselves with energy into something that's quite mundane and normal and enjoy doing it. So there can be all kinds of different ways that we use strengths to develop our sense of willpower in that. And then final point is that one of the piece of research on willpower that interests me the most says that the more you construe your goal as a sense of identity, the more likely you are to do something. So in other words, if you look at the details of it, what must be done, that's not particularly motivating. But if you ask yourself the question, am I the kind of person who does this thing? Then you're much more likely to step into and do it. So that's where character strengths take us. It takes us into the why, the who are we, what are the drivers to bring some of those everyday tasks. Loads more I could say on that, but we have other questions, so I'll pass over to Ryan for the next one.
Wonderful. Okay. Moving on to our next question. How can you maintain peace and stay centered when life gets turbulent? And we had multiple people share a question very similar to this. So, Ryan, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So perhaps that this was a common question, or the thread of it was common, that speaks to what many of us are going through across the world, and changes and all sorts of different things. And I just want to start by just saying, yeah, I can empathize with you, and I feel a lot of that inner turbulence as well, and perhaps, yeah. I'm just we're connected in this way. We could be this work is about being connected, and being connected in our suffering and our struggles. And I think that's important. And there's something healing about that, actually. Um, so to answer this question, how do you maintain peace, when times are turbulent? You know, I you can't just will it, in the sense to build out the last thing and look, but you don't just hope for it to be different. Oh, times are different. I just hope it will get better. My dad used to say, there's a phrase he would say of spit in one hand and wish in the other, and see which fills up first. It's a little bit of a crude thing, but and that's coming from me. I'm high in the character strength of hope. That's actually tied for number one for me. So I deeply value hope, and I think I was always question when he would say that phrase, because I like to wish, I like to hope, I like to come up with goals and pathways to reach the goals and to be optimistic. But we also have to act. So to answer this question of maintaining peace when life is turbulent, um, it's 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 summed up with the word practice. We have to practice. We have to enact a behavioral change. That's a key finding. Behavioral change, behavior activation, a key finding across so much of life suffering, anxiety conditions and depression conditions and medical conditions and pain management conditions is to act. And here, we're talking about major core internal ways of which we can act. We can activate ourselves with mindfulness and character strengths, and there's unlimited amounts of possibilities here. Um, it's the same thing if a person wants to lose weight. I mean, you don't just wish it to happen. You have to make changes in your diet and exercise. We try to find shortcuts and ways around it, and usually those have side effects and problems. But we have to change what we're putting into our body and our activity output. It comes down to those. We want to get around that, and maybe someday we will. But so it's the same thing. We if we want to be able to handle stress and to have what I would use the word for this question, equanimity. If we want to have equanimity, finding that calmness in pressure, during pressure times, we have to be willing to build up new practices, or practices that we already have that have maybe been dormant, um, in order to do that. And why is that? Because then if we're activating new practices, then we're activating new parts of our brain. We're activating new pathways in our brain. And we're actually learning this. This isn't, we won't go into this right now, but we're learning this from some of the latest neuroscience that the V Institute did with um, uh, an institute that puts people in MRI machines and studies them. And so we're getting support for that point. So if we can use our mindfulness to slow ourselves down and to see what's actually going on in the stressful, turbulent times around me and within me, then we begin to see we actually have some capacities here. We actually have some skills. We actually have some things to draw upon. And we have these things called character strengths that we can bring forth. And and then we practice that. We use them more. We talk about them. We journal about them. We self-monitor them. We develop daily habits with them. And suddenly, when the chips are really down and we really need it, things are really stressful, we have our strengths more automatically coming up within us. Or maybe it's like 2 seconds after our upsetting outburst, but we're getting closer and closer to having it in those moments when we need it. So we've done some preliminary research. This is not published, so we take it with a grain of salt, but some preliminary research because this person that, or a lot of the people that ask this question were using the word peace, and thinking of inner peace. And so our preliminary research shows that 86% of people that filled out the surveys after they experienced mBSP experienced greater inner peace. We also asked about relationship peace, and 86% of people also said that they improved in their relationship peace with one of their important relationships. And the way that we word the question is not kind of more of like a correlation, but like, do you feel, you, the participant that took mBSP, do you feel it caused greater inner peace for you, this program? It caused greater relational peace. And so again, high percentages for that. So it's preliminary research. We would need to run intervention studies and so on to make it be an official finding. So no one should sing it from the rooftops, but just it gets at that maybe something really is going on here with these important qualities. Because if we want more peace in the world, now I'm going on a little bit of a tangent here, but if we want more peace in the world, it has to start with ourselves and finding that equanimity, at difficult times, but also around difficult people that believe the opposite that we believe, and people that have different religious beliefs and so on. It has to start with ourselves and being able to find those inner peace resources to be able to connect with people still, create more peace in our relationships, create those stronger foundations, those stronger group ties, and it ripples from there, from inner to relational to group to community and so on. So those are a few things I'd say about that really awesome question. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Ryan. All right, y'all. Moving right along to our next question. How can mBSP be applied to career development and growth? And how might this help me in my direct work and vocational guidance with university students? So Roger's going to answer this one because he has great experience on it.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Sarah. And also just to say, when I was talking about the previous thing, one of the findings that's come with, I mean, we now have some multiple outcome studies of mBSP, but one of the sort of really strong findings was in the work of Dan Pang and Willy Rook, and they did some work in Zurich where they had employees complete mBSP, and then relative to control and relative to mBSR, which is a sort of really famous mindfulness intervention. So that's mindfulness-based stress reduction. And they found one of the things that mBSP did that mBSR didn't do was that it increased the work productivity of the employees, not just as rated by themselves, but as rated by their supervisors. And it's quite rare in psychological studies actually that you have sort of other ratings like that you get other people to rate the outcomes that they see in people. So first place to begin is it does seem that one of the things that mBSP does really, really well is it helps us to know what matters to us and really sort of push towards that. Certainly the studies my PhD student Rebecca Park, I shouldn't really call her that because she's now a doctor in her own right, works for Wake Forest University at present, where she's doing all kinds of work on character and leadership development. But her PhD research was on running mBSP with undergraduates, postgraduates, and university employees. And the main finding she found that the biggest sort of effect size in everything she did was in self-efficacy. In other words, the sense that people having done mBSP felt that they now knew that when challenges, difficulties, things they needed to do came their way, they had a strong confidence that they could do it and they could address it. And so I think in terms of backing our ambitions in the workplace, backing our sense of this is what I'd like to contribute to my place of work or to my business, mBSP is really, really good at that. The other question just to look at as well in terms of actual vocation. So how do we sort of guide people into work? I mean, you can look on the VIA website. There have been studies done on which particular character strengths suit people towards different kind of careers. But another way of thinking about it might be to say, if we're in a career or we find ourselves in a particular job, what are the character strengths that we can bring to that role? So some people will talk about job crafting. They'll talk about how can you rewrite your job description under your line manager's nose in such a way that it really fits with what you're good at and how you work. The other way of thinking about it in terms of recruitment and selection is to think about once you have a sense of what people's character strengths are, what kind of activities would they like to do? So rather than getting stuck on what's the career, what's the profession, we might just ask what kind of things do they like to do? So if they're high in social intelligence, they'll like understanding and helping people and getting at their intentions. So caring professions really, really work quite well. For some people who are very zestful and energetic, very often they end up doing careers that have a lot of physicality to them. I know several people who are athletes or dancers. I even know one person who's a stand-up comic, and it all comes out of their zest, their vitality. So what character strengths help us do is they help us to broaden the idea of not just what's the career, what's the vocation. They broaden the idea of what are the things we feel most energized, come most effortlessly to us, and feel most essential to who we are. The things we would call our signature strengths, those sort of top strengths that we have, and what kind of range of activities might they involve, and how might those activities turn into something that might be a career. So that would be one way of looking at it.
Thank you, Roger. All right, Ryan, passing this next one to you. How can this work help me in my overthinking about everything in life? Whoever wrote this, you are not alone. Again, many people wrote something very similar.
Thank you. I was just kind of adding research citations to the chat and to what Roger was saying. And you can get those on the VIA site under the research tab. Um, Okay, so to this question, yes. Well, so from one overthinker to another, me being an overthinker as well. And well, I probably value, so like in Myers-Briggs lingo, I would value feeling or do consistently value feeling more than thinking or have that preference. But I'm definitely a thinker, but also an overthinker where it gets me in trouble. And the more that I dig into mindfulness and observing myself, the more I see how problematic my thinking is when it comes to overthinking about situations and issues and this situation with this person or that person um and the more work I discover that I need to focus on myself. I love the a wise quote from Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh who said so to set it up, you know the Descartes quote of I think therefore I am, right? So Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh then says, I think, therefore I am not in the present moment. So it's a beautiful kind of addition to that. So I think, therefore I am not in the present moment. So when I am lost in thought, that's kind of the first step is to kind of be aware, I'm off in the past. Maybe I'm going to the future. Maybe I'm going here. The first step is it's good that I am even aware that I'm not here. That's the first thing, just to be aware of the autopilot. And then the next step is okay, so I'm not in the present moment. And do I want to be in the present moment? Sometimes we don't. but okay, yes, I'd like to be in the present moment now, even though this is difficult. And then we come back to the present moment. We use our mindfulness and character strengths within whatever it is that we're dealing with. So mBSP also takes there's two different kind of main approaches for working with thinking and overthinking, and whether it's to work with it, whether it's to transform it, whether it's to get a new lens on it. So one is, of course, the classic mindfulness approach of mindful observation, as I was just kind of giving with the example, to observe that which is going on within us. There's some what's often called in the mindfulness world metacognition, which means to think about your thinking. So we can grow that with the practice of mindfulness. So that's the first piece. And there's a lot of different layers to that of mindful observation and how do you
Hi,
do
I have
that.
a question for you guys.
Oh,
What if
oh,
you're having family issues or
oh, I'm sorry. I think we let, but I'll finish what I was saying. So there's lots of ways we could teach this kind of mindful observation, but um, that would be the first one. The other strategy is character strengths, and the character strengths to remember that these are different thinking patterns, right? So these are patterns for thinking brave thoughts, having brave thoughts, grateful thoughts, fairness thoughts. This is just a part of our experience. So these are some of the things we're growing. Yes, character strengths are also in our feelings. We can feel them in our body. We put them forth in our words, in our actions, but they're part of our mental capacity. And that's a big, big deal, and something that hasn't been focused on in psychology in the last 100 years. And it's something that all of us who are looking at VIA and studying VIA and trying to do more with character strengths, it's a huge opportunity and wake up call that we suddenly have all these capacities we can grow to have healthy thinking. A final thing I'll say about overthinking is around a new study of mindfulness that just came out a year ago or so that looked at several different mindfulness practices and found that mindful walking, I won't go into all of the elements of this randomized study, but mindful walking, which was one of the four practices, was the most helpful of the four practices for improving body awareness. Also, the most helpful for emotional regulation. So we teach mindful walking in session 4 and how to do that with character strengths, session 4 of mBSP. But so if we just kind of think about that, mindful walking is being attentive to our internal self and what's going on outside of us as we're moving in our space, outside, inside, in our home, our work, outdoors, and we're getting more in touch with our body. And so it's actually a practice. Like these are all practices we keep growing with to reconnect this thing that also often feels quite separated, our mind and our body. But also it might just help us, as this study showed, to manage our emotions better. And I can't tell you how many times I've recommended or others have recommended when somebody's feeling really angry, we pause. Rather than screaming and yelling, we pause, and often it's go for a walk. And there's some wisdom to that. It's not just to separate yourself from the trigger. Again, that's not always the answer, but like sometimes it's the answer. But then also there's something going on with slowing down and tuning into our body moving that can help regulate. So a few things there on overthinking. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Definitely gonna take a mindful walk today at some point and put that into practice. We are nearing the end of our time together, and I know there were several other questions in the chat. We had folks ask about research. Ryan did share a few studies, so if you haven't seen that yet, I'll give you a second before we say goodbye to copy that and check it out. And you can expect a follow-up email from us with the recording, so you can dive back in and listen to the practices that were shared. And yeah, we hope to see you online again sometime soon. Uh, More webinars to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for being here. It's been a pleasure and an honor. Thank you, Roger, for collaborating.
Yeah, thank you.